mental illness content. 3. Change how you share. If you're going to post about mental health, focus on coping and recovery, not just suffering. Share what's helping, share progress, share hope. Not just I'm dying, but I'm struggling, and here's what I'm doing about it. 4. Get professional help. Social media is not therapy. Online friends are not mental health professionals. If you're genuinely struggling, get actual treatment. Therapy, psychiatry, evidence-based interventions. 5. Build connections beyond shared diagnosis. Join communities based on interests, not just shared suffering. Find friends who know you as more than the anxious one. Build relationships that can withstand you getting healthier. 6. Practice active coping, not passive rumination. When you're struggling, do something about it. Use coping skills. Reach out for real support. Take action. Don't just post about how bad you feel and wait for validation in the comments. Here's a hard truth. Getting better might mean losing some of your online community. If your entire social circle is bonded through shared mental illness, some of those people might not stick around when you start recovering. That's okay. That's actually necessary. You need people who celebrate your progress, not people who are invested in you staying sick. You need friends who like you for who you are, not what you struggle with. You need community that wants you to thrive, not community that just wants someone to commiserate with. Letting go of relationships that are based on shared suffering is part of recovery, and it's worth it. Let me address something specific. The argument that romanticization is just coping or artistic expression. I'm not against art about mental illness. Some of the most powerful art explores suffering. I'm not against humor about mental health. Comedy can be therapeutic. I'm not against honest sharing about your struggles. Vulnerability is important. What I'm against is making suffering your brand. Making mental illness your aesthetic. Performing breakdown for content. There's a difference between creating art that processes pain and creating content that glorifies it. There's a difference between using humor to cope and using mental illness as a punchline for engagement. There's a difference between being vulnerable and making trauma your personality. Ask yourself, is this helping me heal? Or is this keeping me stuck? Is this authentic expression? Or is this performance for validation? Am I processing my pain? Or am I romanticizing it? Be honest with yourself. Here's what recovery actually looks like, and it's not aesthetic. Recovery is doing the boring, hard work of therapy. It's taking medication even though it's not edgy. It's building routines and structure even though that's not relatable content. Recovery is getting up and taking a shower when you don't want to. It's eating regular meals. It's going to bed at reasonable times. Recovery is setting boundaries. Going to appointments, practicing coping skills, doing the unsexy, unglamorous work of building mental health. Recovery doesn't look cool on Instagram. It's not poetic. It's not aesthetic. It's just getting better. Slowly, imperfectly, gradually building a life that doesn't revolve around suffering. And that's not content that goes viral. That's not what gets engagement. But it's what actually changes your life. Let me end with this. You deserve better than a life where mental illness is your entire identity. You deserve better than a community that only values you when you're suffering. You deserve better than performing your pain for likes and validation. You are more than your diagnosis. You are more than your struggles. You are more than your trauma. And building a life beyond mental illness, a life that includes joy, purpose, connection, growth, is possible. But you have to stop romanticizing the suffering. You have to stop performing for an audience. You have to stop making mental illness the most interesting thing about you. Because it's not. You're so much more than that. And the world needs you well, not aesthetically broken. If this episode made you uncomfortable, good. Sit with that discomfort. Ask yourself, why are you invested in your mental illness as an identity? Are you romanticizing your suffering? Are you performing for validation instead of actually healing? If the answer is yes, it's okay. Awareness is the first step. You can change this. If this resonated with you, if you're ready to stop romanticizing mental illness and start actually recovering, hit that subscribe button, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, drop a comment. What's one way you're going to shift how you relate to your mental health? I'm Shoal. This is Big Feelings Lab, and I'll see you next week. Your mental illness is not an aesthetic. Your life is waiting for you on the other side of recovery. Go live it. Your depression is not an aesthetic. Your anxiety is not a personality trait. Your trauma is not content. And the fact that an entire generation is romanticizing mental illness on social media is not just cringe, it's dangerous. I'm Shoal, researcher and educator, and this is Big Feelings Lab, where we take the latest science on emotions and turn it into tools you can actually use. Today, we're talking about something that's everywhere right now, the romanticization of mental illness. Sad girl autumn. I'm just a girl with anxiety. Mental breakdown photo dumps, crying selfies, aesthetic depression posts. And look, I get it. I understand the appeal. There's something compelling about finding beauty in pain, community in shared struggle, identity in your diagnosis. But we need to talk about what this is actually doing to mental health, because the research is clear. Romanticizing mental illness makes it worse, not better. And if you're someone who's been posting your breakdowns for likes, who's made your mental illness your entire personality, who's consuming endless, relatable depression memes, this episode is for you. This is going to be uncomfortable. You might feel called out. That's kind of the point. Because someone needs to say it. Performing mental illness on social media is not the same as healing from it. Let's get into it. First, let me be very clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying mental illness isn't real. It absolutely is. I'm not saying people shouldn't talk about their struggles. Openness and destigmatization are important. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with finding community online or expressing yourself through art and aesthetics. What I am saying is, there's a difference between authentically sharing your mental health journey and romanticizing mental illness as an identity and aesthetic. And right now, on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, we've crossed that line, way past it. Let's talk about what romanticization actually looks like. It's the sad girl aesthetic posts, artfully messy rooms, cigarettes, wine bottles, tear-stained faces, all filtered to look beautiful. It's the depression playlists and POV, you're having a mental breakdown videos set to melancholic music. It's the bios that say depressed, anxious, BPD, ADHD, like it's a personality description. It's the constant posting about how broken you are, how you can't function, how you're too mentally ill for basic tasks, but making it look poetic, aesthetic, even aspirational. It's treating mental illness like it's edgy, deep, interesting, like suffering makes you more authentic or artistic. And here's the problem. When you romanticize mental illness, you do several harmful things simultaneously. First, you make mental illness part of your identity instead of something you're experiencing. There's a huge difference between I have depression and I am depression. One is a condition you're managing, the other is who you are. When mental illness becomes your identity, recovery becomes a threat. Because if you get better, who are you? If your entire online presence is built around being the anxious one or the depressed girl, what happens when you start feeling better? If your friendships are bonded through shared mental illness, what happens if you heal and they don't? Or they heal and you don't? Research on identity and mental health is clear. People who strongly identify with their mental illness have worse long-term outcomes. They're less likely to engage in treatment, less likely to practice healthy coping skills, more likely to relapse. Because getting better means losing a core part of how they see themselves. And I see this constantly with young people online. Their mental illness has become so central to their identity that they're unconsciously invested in staying sick, not because they want to suffer, but because they don't know who they are without it. Second problem with romanticization, it normalizes suffering to the point where you stop seeking help. When your entire feed is people posting about how they can't get out of bed, how they're having a mental breakdown, how they're barely surviving, and everyone's just liking and commenting same and relatable. You stop seeing it as a crisis that needs intervention. You start seeing it as just how life is. Everyone's depressed, everyone's anxious, everyone's traumatized. So why bother trying to change it? This is particularly dangerous for younger people who don't have enough life experience to know this is not normal. This is not how everyone feels. This is not how life has to be. When you're surrounded by content that treats severe mental illness as relatable and normal, you don't realize you need help. You think, everyone feels this way. This is just what being in your 20s is like. This is just the current generation. No, feeling suicidal is not normal. Being unable to function is not normal. Having panic attacks regularly is not normal. Those are symptoms of mental illness that deserve treatment, but romanticization makes you think they're just part of your personality. Third problem, romanticization creates perverse incentives. When you get attention, validation, and community from posting about your mental illness, your brain learns, being mentally ill gets me what I need. I'm not saying people are faking. I'm saying that when suffering becomes the thing that gets you likes, comments, and connection, you're unconsciously incentivized to stay in that suffering. Psychologists call this secondary gain, the benefits you get from being sick that actually reinforce the sickness. If the most engagement you get on social media is when you post about having a breakdown, what does your brain learn? If the only time people really show up for you is when you're in crisis, what does that teach you about how to get your needs met? If your entire friend group bonds over shared mental illness, what happens when you start feeling better and don't have that in common anymore? These incentives are subtle. You're not consciously choosing to stay sick, but your brain is learning. Illness equals connection, attention, identity, community, and that makes recovery harder. Fourth problem, it spreads maladaptive coping mechanisms. When someone with a huge following posts about their eating disorder, their self-harm, their substance use, and makes it look aesthetic, poetic, or relatable, they're not just sharing their struggle, they're modeling behaviors. Research shows that exposure to others' self-destructive behavior, especially when it's presented in a positive or neutral light, increases the likelihood of imitation. This is why social media platforms try to remove or hide content about eating disorders, suicide methods, and self-harm. Because it spreads. But romanticized mental illness flies under the radar because it's not explicitly pro-disorder. It's just making it look beautiful, making it look deep, making it look like part of who you are. And young people who are vulnerable see that and think, that's how you're supposed to cope. That's what depression looks like. That's what makes you interesting. They're learning maladaptive patterns from people who are themselves stuck in those patterns. Fifth problem, it trivializes actual mental illness. When everyone is self-diagnosing based on TikTok, when every bad day is my depression, when every worry is my anxiety, when every personality quirk is my ADHD, it dilutes what these diagnoses actually mean. Real depression is not just feeling sad. Real anxiety is not just worrying about a test. Real ADHD is not just being easily distracted sometimes. These are clinical conditions with specific diagnostic criteria that significantly impair functioning. When we throw these terms around casually, when we self-diagnose based on relatable content, we make it harder for people with actual mental illness to be taken seriously. And we make it harder for people to recognize when they actually need professional help. Because if everyone has anxiety, then your panic attacks must not be that serious. If everyone's depressed, then your suicidal thoughts must be normal. The casualization and romanticization of mental health language has made it both everywhere and nowhere. Everyone's talking about mental illness, but nobody's actually getting proper treatment. Let me talk about what this looks like specifically on different platforms. On TikTok, it's the POV, you're having a mental breakdown videos. The day in the life of someone with depression content that shows lying in bed all day, not showering, eating junk food, presented as relatable and even humorous. There's romanticization of psychiatric hospitals, people making mental hospital packing lists, people filming themselves or others in treatment settings. There's the trauma dumping as introduction trend, where people share their most painful experiences within seconds of meeting someone online, treating trauma as an icebreaker. On Instagram, it's the aesthetic depression posts, the carefully curated messy rooms, the artful photos of medication bottles, the crying selfies with captions about how broken you are. It's the just a girl who list of mental illness symptoms. Posts that turn suffering into quirky personality traits. On Twitter, it's the constant self-deprecating humor about mental illness, the jokes about wanting to die, the I'm so mentally ill competitions where people try to out-trauma each other. It's the way every struggle becomes, I'm literally having a panic attack, and every inconvenience becomes, this triggered my PTSD. And look, I understand the function this serves. Humor and community are coping mechanisms. Talking openly about mental health reduces stigma. Finding others who relate makes you feel less alone. But we've gone past that. We've moved from destigmatization to romanticization, from honest sharing to performance, from coping mechanism to identity. Here's what research tells us about what actually helps with mental health. Active coping strategies, not passive rumination. Professional treatment, not self-diagnosis. Building a life worth living, not building an identity around suffering. Connection based on shared values and interests, not just shared diagnoses. Moving through emotions, not camping out in them. But romanticized mental illness culture encourages the opposite. It encourages rumination, constantly posting about how bad you feel, constantly consuming content about mental illness, staying immersed in your suffering. It encourages self-diagnosis and resisting professional help. I don't need therapy, I have TikTok. Therapy is expensive, I'll just talk to my online friends. It encourages making mental illness your whole identity instead of one part of a complex human experience. It encourages bonding solely over shared suffering instead of shared joy, interests, or values. It encourages staying in emotions, performing them, aestheticizing them instead of processing and moving through them. None of this is helping. And the mental health statistics among young people prove it. Let me be specific about the harm this causes. For people who are actually mentally ill, romanticization delays treatment and recovery. It makes you think your suffering is beautiful, deep, interesting, so why change it? It gives you community and validation for staying sick instead of getting better. It teaches you to perform your illness instead of treating it. For people who aren't actually mentally ill but are convinced they are, you adopt the language, behaviors, and identity of mental illness without actually having clinical conditions. You start to embody what you're performing. You convince yourself you're more impaired than you are. You might actually create mental health problems through constant rumination and negative thought patterns. For everyone, it normalizes suffering. It makes people think severe mental illness is just part of being human, so they don't seek help when they actually need it. It creates echo chambers where everyone is validating each other's maladaptive coping, and no one is encouraging actual recovery. It spreads harmful behaviors and thought patterns. Let me talk about the difference between authentic sharing and romanticization. Authentic sharing looks like, I'm struggling with depression. Here's what I'm doing about it. Therapy, medication, lifestyle changes. Some days are hard, but I'm working on it. I had a panic attack today. It was really difficult. I used my coping skills and I'm okay now. Here's what helped. Living with mental illness is challenging. Treatment is helping. Recovery isn't linear, but I'm committed to it. Romanticization looks like, I'm such a mess. I can't do anything. Look at my aesthetic depression room. Isn't my suffering poetic? Just a girl with crippling anxiety and depression and ADHD and trauma, barely surviving, but make it aesthetic. Mental breakdown core, crying in the bathtub vibes, can't get out of bed energy. See the difference? One acknowledges struggle while focusing on coping and recovery. One makes struggle the entire point and aesthetic. One treats mental illness as something you're managing. One treats it as who you are. One moves toward health. One stays stuck in illness. Here's what I want you to understand. You are not your mental illness. Depression might be something you have. It's not who you are. Anxiety might be something you experience. It's not your personality. Trauma might be something that happened to you. It's not your identity. You are a complex human being with interests, values, relationships, goals, quirks, strengths, and yes, also struggles. When you make mental illness your entire identity, you lose all the other parts of yourself, and you make recovery impossible, because recovery would mean losing yourself. Let me talk about what to do instead. If you've been romanticizing your mental illness, here's how to shift. 1. Diversify your identity. You are not just your diagnosis. What else are you interested in? What do you value? What brings you joy? Start posting about those things. Start building an identity that includes but is not dominated by mental illness. 2. Curate your consumption. If your entire feed is mental illness content, you're training your brain to focus on illness. Follow accounts about your interests, your hobbies, things that inspire you. Limit exposure to mental illness content. 3. Change how you share. If you're going to post about mental health, focus on coping and recovery, not just suffering. Share what's helping, share progress, share hope. Not just I'm dying, but I'm struggling, and here's what I'm doing about it. 4. Get professional help. Social media is not therapy. Online friends are not mental health professionals. If you're genuinely struggling, get actual treatment. Therapy, psychiatry, evidence-based interventions. 5. Build connections beyond shared diagnosis. Join communities based on interests, not just shared suffering. Find friends who know you as more than the anxious one. Build relationships that can withstand you getting healthier. 6. Practice active coping, not passive rumination. When you're struggling, do something about it. Use coping skills. Reach out for real support. Take action. Don't just post about how bad you feel and wait for validation in the comments. Here's a hard truth. Getting better might mean losing some of your online community. If your entire social circle is bonded through shared mental illness, some of those people might not stick around when you start recovering. That's okay. That's actually necessary. You need people who celebrate your progress, not people who are invested in you staying sick. You need friends who like you for who you are, not what you struggle with. You need community that wants you to thrive, not community that just wants someone to commiserate with. Letting go of relationships that are based on shared suffering is part of recovery, and it's worth it. Let me address something specific. The argument that romanticization is just coping or artistic expression. I'm not against art about mental illness. Some of the most powerful art explores suffering. I'm not against humor about mental health. Comedy can be therapeutic. I'm not against honest sharing about your struggles. Vulnerability is important. What I'm against is making suffering your brand. Making mental illness your aesthetic. Performing breakdown for content. There's a difference between creating art that processes pain and creating content that glorifies it. There's a difference between using humor to cope and using mental illness as a punchline for engagement. There's a difference between being vulnerable and making trauma your personality. Ask yourself, is this helping me heal? Or is this keeping me stuck? Is this authentic expression? Or is this performance for validation? Am I processing my